Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad you're all joining us today. My name is McKenna Sturgeon. I am CML's Training and Marketing Specialist. Today we're going to be covering the next installment of our election webinar series, and this is going to be after the polls have closed, canvassing the vote and recount. We're so happy to have Karen Goldman here again with us today to go through all of this with us. I don't think that she really needs an introduction. She knows what she's doing. You all know her really well, so we'll get to this as soon as we can. I do have a couple of housekeeping items for you really quick. To those who are new to GoToWebinar, you should have a control panel on the right of your screen. That's where you're going to be able to ask questions. So please go ahead and enter your questions into the questions box, and I'll be able to ask those for you as the presentation continues. We'll be asking after each slide to make sure that we get all of those answered. Additionally, I did want to make you aware that you can apply for 1/2 credit with CMCA. There will be more information on that at the end of this presentation and in the email that I send you as well afterward. So you'll get information on that as well as a link to the recording of this webinar so that you can go back and watch it as many times as you would like. So with that, I won't take up any more of our time because I want to leave as much time as possible for questions. Karen, do you want to go ahead and get us started?
I can do that. Thanks, McKenna. So good afternoon, everybody. My computer shows that it's a balmy 13 degrees outside, so I hope everybody is staying warm. And thank you for attending. The topics for today, as McKenna mentioned, we're going to talk about what happens after the polls have closed. We're going to specifically focus on 2 items, canvassing the vote and recount procedures. However, since this is the last pre-election webinar that we'll be hosting, I'm going to leave time at the end for you to ask any questions that you may have, anything that lingering and that kind of thing, or anything you're not sure about, and we'll get to those during this presentation. So if we go a little bit more than an hour, I hope that's okay. And obviously, if you have to leave, you just go right ahead and do it. So election day is almost upon us. I'm guessing by now you've got your UOCAVA ballots sent out. For those of you doing your mail ballot election, ballots will go out next week. You've appointed your election judges, or you're getting ready to appoint your election judges. Your ballots have been ready to go in a polling place election. You've been collecting absentee voter applications if you need to. So all pretty much the stuff that takes place at the beginning of the election either is done or is about to be done. So now we're going to talk about what happens after 7 o'clock on April 5th. So McKenna, if I could have the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so basically here is the procedure. In a polling place election, the judges will wait until the polls close at 7 o'clock, or the last person in line to vote at 7 o'clock has the chance to vote. And then once that has happened, then the judges can open the ballot box and start counting the ballots. Now, in a mail ballot election, as you know, the process can begin 15 days before the day of the election. That would be checking in the ballots. That would be doing signature verification, opening the ballot envelopes, getting them ready to be counted, and even starting the counting process prior to the close of polls, as long as no total results are obtained before that time. So you're going to tally the votes. You're going to, whether you do a polling place or mail ballot election, you're going to tally the votes. And you're going to indicate the vote for all candidates and any ballot items, and you're going to do it by using numbers. On the tally sheet, what I like to do is I like to have a sheet with all the races and items on the ballot and do hash marks and then total them up. And the tally sheet will include the following information. It's the votes for each candidate and the ballot item, and then you want to make sure that your judges initial the form so that we know that it's official. So then if you, in if once you complete the count, then the tally sheet along with the counted ballots are returned to a ballot box or ballot boxes, which could be your, your paper boxes, sealed, and the seal sheet is an initial. Now the seal sheet, as what that is that when you're getting ready to use your ballot box, whether it's 15 days before the day of the election or the morning of the election, what you're going to do is you're going to open the ballot box, you're going to make sure that it's empty, you're going to show the judges that it's empty, and then you're going to seal it. So you're going to have a piece of paper with the date and the number of the seal, and then you're going to put that inside the ballot box, and then you're going to seal up the ballot box. And then when you open the ballot box and you break the seal, you're going to write that the seal number and make sure that it matches the number that you had written in the morning or when you first closed the ballot box. Okay. So continuing on after the polls are closed, and this, like I say, is primarily for people doing polling place elections. Any ballots that are not counted, and this is again in a polling place election, any ballots not counted or those for which the votes can't be determined, somebody scribbles on it or something like that, they don't indicate how they wanted to vote. There are overvotes, which is voting for more people or items than they're permitted, or undervotes, which would be blank votes or no votes. Those are set aside and those are not included in your tally. So what we're tallying is only the actual votes cast. And then then the judges are going to create a judge's certificate. And the certificate itself should be prepared prior to the election, except for filling in the blanks. And I've given the citation in statute that identifies what this form looks like. To me personally, it's kind of a redundant form. And I'm guessing that if we were to update the municipal election code, we would eliminate the need to put the vote in words. And that's basically what this does, is it puts the vote in words. But for right now, it's part of state statute and it's something we need to do. So we've got the tally sheet, we've got the judge's certificate, and continuing on to the next page, please, McKenna. Okay, there's a third form that you fill out. And this is basically, let's see, what will we call this? This is kind of like a ballot status sheet. And it identifies the number of ballots delivered to the voters. So for a polling place election, that would be the number of people who signed in the poll book. And also you'll have, in a polling place election, you'll have the ballot stubs. So you can figure out the number of people who voted by looking at the last ballot stub you have. In a mail ballot election, it's the number of ballots that you sent out to your active registered electors. And then the number of ballots actually voted. In a polling place election, hopefully it's the same number as the ballots that were delivered. Nobody walked out with a ballot, and you certainly don't have more voted ballots than you have ballot stubs. Obviously, in a mail ballot election, you're not going to get 100% voter turnout, but wouldn't it be wonderful if we did? So you just identify the number of ballots voted. Then you also want to include the number of spoiled ballots. And a spoiled ballot in a polling place election would be a ballot where somebody goes to vote and they mark it wrong and they come back and they want another ballot. So the original one is considered to be a spoiled ballot. So you give them a brand new one, and you would give with a new number with new ballot stubs. In a mail ballot election, instead of spoiled ballots, you're going to the next one would be, actually is what I'm talking about, is the number, it would be your undeliverables. Those would be an option, or let's see, would be they're not spoiled ballots, but they're undeliverables. These are people, because they're sent to active voters and because the ballots are not forwarded, these are people who have moved from their residence that's on their voter registration form and they haven't updated their form. So those ballots will be returned to you from the post office, and that's what you would include on this sheet. And then the number of ballots not delivered to voters, that would basically be the number that you printed minus all of the number that actually were sent and sent out to voters. So everything needs to add up. And then there's a fourth form. I know it's crazy, but there's a fourth form. We're keeping good records here. And this is the final form, and this is the abstract of votes. And this is what you will post in a conspicuous place once the election results have been tallied. It'll give the names of the offices, the names of the candidates, any ballot titles of items that were on the ballot, and the number of votes counted. So you can fill this out ahead of time, complete this ahead of time, and then all you're doing is you're filling in the numbers. And then, as I say, you post the abstract votes on the outside of your polling location, generally on your door. And you could also post it on your website or any place else that you post information. I know this isn't exactly what you do after the polls have, well, it is what you do after the polls have closed. Are there any questions about any of these forms or any of the information I've given you?
Doesn't look like we have any questions yet. Oh,
Okay.
hold on, one just came in. Sorry about that.
Great. Go ahead.
So since UOCAVAs come in later than election day, what do we do with the abstract once the ballot date passes?
That's a great question, and I will say it now, and I will repeat it when it shows up on the next slide. And let's look at the next slide to see if that's where it is. Okay, no, okay. The votes on election night, if you have UOCAVA voters and you're waiting on the ballots, and remember those ballots have to be postmarked on election day and can be received up to 8 days after the election. So if you're waiting on UOCAVA ballots and or you conducted a mail ballot election where you're doing signature verification and you haven't been able to identify all of the signatures, and so you send out what I'm calling discrepant signature letters, which basically say, we can't, your signature was missing, or we can't match your signature with that in the database. Did you vote? If so, please fill out this form. That also can come back 8 days before the election. So until you have all that information and you conduct the canvass, which we're going to talk about, the election results are unofficial. And I always like to put the word unofficial on top of the abstract of votes that are posted on the front door of the polling place, which means that all those forms, or most of those forms that you have filled out, certainly the tally sheet, the abstract of votes, and maybe some of the others, may have to be completed a second time after the deadline for receiving the UOCAVA ballots and the discrepant signature letters. So, unofficial until the canvass is done.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that should be all the questions we have right now.
All right. So now let's talk about the canvass. The canvass is sometimes called the survey of election results. And the definition, this is a dictionary definition of the word canvass. And you notice it has 2 S's and not one, which signifies a fabric, but never mind. So canvass is when you examine something carefully, you scrutinize it, or you make a thorough examination. So the purpose of the canvass is to review the election results. It's to review what the judges did and to verify that the numbers add up, that there weren't more ballots recorded as being voted as there were handed out, and you're verifying those results. And I want to make it very clear that the canvass is not a recount. You do not go back and repeat the process that the election judges did. So it's a review. When I've done the canvass in the past, and especially when I've had the mayor be part of the canvass board, I've gone kind of beyond looking at what the judges do or did. And what I've done is I have identified the process, how we, you know, when the ballots came in, we put them in the box. If it was a mail ballot election, we checked the signature against the database. You talk about the discrepant signature letters. In other words, give the person conducting the canvass as being part of the canvass board kind of an insider's view of how the election was conducted. I find that's very, very helpful. And then we take a look at the documents that we need to look at in order to verify that what the judges did, they did correctly. So by state statute, the canvass is conducted by the clerk and the mayor. But if you don't have a mayor for whatever reason, or the mayor was a candidate and his or her name was on the ballot, you don't use the mayor, you use someone else. And this is kind of the order of who you should choose. You can choose a municipal judge if you have one. If you have an election commission, you can choose a member of the election commission. Not all municipalities have election commissions. Or absent either of those possibilities, you can choose a person who's qualified to be an election judge. And to qualify to be an election judge, you have to be at least 18 years of age and registered to vote anywhere in Colorado, and you cannot have actually served as an election judge. So maybe you tap your public works director or your parks person or your maintenance person, or maybe someone in your office, if you have someone in your office, who was not sworn in as an election judge during the election. And that's in state statute. And obviously the reason you don't want to use somebody who served as an election judge is because they would be looking over the work that they did. And of course, you know, that doesn't make sense. To me, it's the same reasoning why in a protest hearing on any citizen petition, you don't want to have to be the hearing officer and make judgments of the work that you did in order to check the signatures. So that's how that works. Any questions about the canvas itself or who gets to be on the canvas board?
So we do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
The first one asks, what if the mayor was up for election but unopposed?
Doesn't matter, he was on the ballot.
Awesome.
So therefore, he was a candidate for election. Opposed or unopposed, he's still a candidate for election. So he cannot be part of the canvas.
Perfect. And then the second one asks, so it shouldn't be the mayor pro tem?
It could be the mayor pro tem as long as the mayor pro tem was not on the ballot. In other words, anybody who was on the ballot cannot be part of the canvas board.
Perfect. I think that is all the questions for now.
Okay, so we've got some more information about the canvas, so let's go ahead and continue. Okay, now, the canvas can be completed on election night under certain circumstances, and these are listed below, and basically is no UOCAVA voters and a polling place election. So if you have no UOCAVA voters and you had a polling place election, your results on election night, whereas before I said they were unofficial, will now be official. Sorry, I got to get in the right picture frame here. They will be official because you're not waiting on anything. However, if you have UOCAVA voters and or you have a mail ballot election, and as I said, you've had to ask people if they actually voted because you couldn't match up the signatures, then the results are unofficial and you have until the 10th day after the election, which happens to do your canvas. So the way it would work is that your election is on a Tuesday. People have 8 days after the election in which for the UOCAVA ballots to come in, for the discrepant signature responses to come back. And remember, election day is 0. So the day after the election is day 1. So in essence, by Wednesday of the following week, that's the deadline for receiving UOCAVA ballots and discrepant signature letters. Then generally, so then the next day, because they have until the close of business on that day, so the next day you would count any additional ballots that have come in, add them to the election results, the tally, all the other forms, and then after you've done that, either that day or the following day, which is the 10th day, you would conduct the canvass. So if you know your mayor is going to be on the canvass board, I would make sure that he or she is available on the day you plan on conducting the canvass. So you can let that person know right away, and you can set a time that works for that person and be scheduled to conduct the canvass. If you're doing it on election night, if you're doing the canvass, then I would just make sure that you've got somebody available. Like I said, it could be your public works director, it could be, your parks director, somebody. It doesn't even have to be a municipal employee. It could be another citizen to conduct the canvass. Make sure that person is going to be available. And again, you don't have to do it on election night, but the point is you don't have to wait for that 8-day deadline because there's nothing to wait for. But the deadline, the absolute deadline for conducting the canvass is 10 days after the day of the election. And as I said before, the results are unofficial until after the canvass has been completed. So if on election night, you post your election results and you say unofficial, and then the next day the canvass board meets, suddenly unofficial becomes official, even if there's no change. In other words, if you're there till 2 in the morning, the last thing in the world you're going to have brain power for is to conduct a canvass. So you're going to wait until the next day, but you will post the information at 2:01, okay, on your front door, and it's still unofficial. And then the last bullet here, which I think is really important, is that it is my opinion that the candidate should not be sworn in until after the canvass is completed. And when we get to recount, you'll understand another reason why. Now, I know that there are several home rule municipalities, and there may be some statutory municipalities who have it in their code when somebody gets sworn in. In the old days, and I was here for the old days, but in the old days, when we didn't have UOCAVA ballots that we waited for, and we weren't doing mail ballot elections and waiting for these discrepant signature letters to be approved, some people would have their board meetings the very next day or on the Thursday afterwards, and the election results on election night were the final election results, the official election results, so people got sworn in immediately. And their codes will say, shall be sworn in at the first meeting following the election. Well, you could do it, but I certainly suggest you don't do it. You wait until they are official, and then you could swear them in at the next meeting. Now, you don't necessarily have to swear people in a public forum. I know that I think the city and county of Denver a lot of times swear their people in just in an office once their canvass is completed, and theirs I think takes a lot longer to be completed. But a lot of people like to do it in a public forum. So any questions about this?
Yes, we have a couple about judges.
Okay.
So first, can your adult children be the judge or canvass?
Well, if they're 18 years of age and registered to vote, they qualify, but we have to look at the optics. If your election has been contentious, and if your elected officials unfortunately have very little trust in the people who work for them, I think it would be a good idea to keep your family away from that. It's your choice. There's nothing that prohibits it, but I think what you have to do is consider the tone of your community and any kind of optics that allowing your kids to be the judges or of election or on the canvas board, what that would look like.
Perfect. So the next one asks, can the police officers be judges?
If they're 18 years of age and are registered in Colorado, they can be election judges. But remember, election judges for a polling place election cannot leave once they get sworn in before 7 o'clock in the morning. So I'm not sure that your police officers would have the ability to take a whole day out of doing what they do in order to be judges. But if they can, fine.
Awesome. And then looks like this might be the last one for this section. I have a hard time finding election judges. I'm holding a mail ballot election. Can I have my judges come in the day after election day to count ballots?
I would not wait until after election day to do it. And if you haven't contacted your county clerk for a list of potentially good election judges, I strongly suggest you do that. They will know who the good people are, who understand how to do signature verification, even though our process is slightly different from the ones they use at the county, and actually it's a lot easier. Having somebody who understands it would be very important. And remember, you're going to need at least 3. But I think if you wait until the day, and you can start this process 15 days before the day of the election. Here's the way when I talk to people about who ask me the question, when do I bring in my election judges? Here's what I tell them. The goal in my mind, and this is my personal goal, is that on the day before the election, you're all caught up with everything that has been returned thus far. So that on election day, you're basically just dealing with whatever comes in on election day. And the reason I say that is because the way the ballots are returned is that right after the ballots go out, people want to be done with it and you get a whole lot. Then in the ensuing couple of weeks, I'm trying to get my hand here so we can do this. It levels off and it's very low. And then the closer it gets to the election, it goes way up. And I know that sometimes at the county level, they get 40% of their ballots on election day. So I'm working with a couple of municipalities on their elections, and we've asked for flexibility. And maybe you bring them in right at the beginning and then you don't bring them in for a few days. And then as you get closer to election day, you bring them back in. But if you waited until the day after the election to start counting your ballots, and I don't know how many ballots you're anticipating, you're going to have a lot of angry people, especially the candidates who want to know, did I win or not? So I wouldn't do that.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that is all the questions for right now.
All right, well then let's move along.
Oh, we've had one more. That
Okay.
was just a follow-up.
Right.
Can I give you one more? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, we want to get to all the questions.
Perfect. So this one says we'd have to have the judges on the 8th day too, right?
Yes, and you would. Yeah, you'd want to bring them back, but it's going to be, that's not going to take a lot of time. To be perfectly honest with you, in a standalone, which by that I mean a non-November election, the chance of you getting back a whole ton of your ballots sent to UOCAVA voters is going to be remarkable if that happens. I worked in a small community. They only had 3 UOCAVA voters, and 2 of them were local, had local addresses, didn't get any of them back. But yeah, so you want to definitely bring your judges in, and if you use people who were not the election judge but could serve as election judges, as opposed, I mean, like not your mayor, not your municipal court judge, you can have them count whatever ballots are left to be counted, add them to the total, and then do the canvass. But yes, you do have to bring people back on whatever day you're going to count. It wouldn't be the 8th day, it'd be the 9th day after the election. But you have to bring people in to count whatever else you receive after election day.
Perfect. And this spurred just one more follow-up.
Sure.
For polling place elections, we need judges to wait until 7 p.m. to start counting.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right.
For a polling place election, it's going to be a long day. They're supposed to get there by 6:15. They stay for 12 hours and 45 minutes, and then they take whatever time it takes to count the ballots. So it's a long day for them.
Awesome. All right, I think we're ready to move on. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so more on the canvas. And here's what you're looking for when you're conducting the canvas. You're looking to make sure that the election returns includes all information that's required by law. Okay, so number of ballots, sent out, number of, it's all the list on the previous slides that I've given you. Number of ballots sent out, number of ballots voted, number of spoiled ballots. In a mail ballot election, the undeliverable ballots, just all the information that you're required. You want to look at all the forms that the judges have filled out, and you want to make sure that everything matches up. You look at the tally sheets, and there's one number, and then you look at the abstracted votes, and there's a different number. Well, it could just be an error. And so at that point, the people conducting the canvass can correct any clerical mistakes, any additions, any numbers that are not wrong, and those are corrected by the judges of election. And then the things that you want to remember deal with tie votes and recount. And nothing can be determined until you have official results. Let's say on election night, and I've had this happen when I've worked for a community, there was a tie vote in one of the races. I think and this happened to be a recall. There was a tie vote in a recall, okay, on election night. But we had discrepant signatures, letters sent out. We also had UOCAVA ballots we were waiting for. So we didn't know that there was whether the vote was still going to be tied by the time we finished counting all the potential ballots that could come in. So even if you have a tie on election night and you are waiting for UOCAVA ballots or discrepant signature ballots, you don't know if you really have a tie. So you have to wait on the canvas to identify if you have a tie vote. And if you do wind up with a tie vote, then the votes are broken by lot. Now, the lot can be anything. It could be pick a name out of the hat, pick a number, pick a card, whatever, but it is done by lot. You could do similar type of procedure that you use to get the order of people's names on the ballots. But you have to wait until the votes are official, and the votes are not official until you've done the canvass. And here's the big point. I put this in bold because this is really important. Just like with a tie vote, the need for a recount is determined once the canvass is performed. Now, I have to tell you, even before the vote is tallied, and certainly as the vote is being tallied, I get some panicked phone calls or emails or texts, well, from clerks who are worried about a recount. And I tell them, take a deep breath. You don't know if you're going to need to have a recount until the votes are official and you've done the canvass. Then if you think you have to have a recount, let's talk and we'll figure out how it works. But I want to make sure everybody doesn't get ahead of themselves and start worrying about things. You know, clerks are great because they want to do things correctly. And so they think about all the possible things that could happen, all the hazards, the trip falls, and that kind of thing. And I do the same thing, and unfortunately, it makes me crazy, and I'm sure it makes them crazy too. So I would say just let's take things one step at a time, and just remember, official results become official when you do the canvass. Questions?
We do have one question.
Okay.
It says, what about mail ballot elections? When/how often should we bring in election judges?
Well, that pretty much, I don't have a pat answer for that. Other than the fact, remember how I talked about how ballots generally come in? A bunch will come in at the beginning and then it's going to fall off and then they will come in, you know, late towards closer to the election. I think that you could probably take a look at your volume of mail as it comes in. What I try to do when I hire election judges, I let them know that this is when we're going to start counting the ballots and here's election day. I'd let them know that we're not going to use them every day, and I ask if they can be flexible. And when I worked on an election 2021, for the town of Parker, we basically on a day-by-day basis figured out if people needed to come in the next day, because we knew what the volume of the mail was, and if it didn't make sense for them to come in, we didn't bring them in. But when we did bring them in, we made sure there was at least 4 hours of work for them to do. So the answer to your question is, I don't know. You're just going to have to work with it. And again, if your goal is like my goal, where you're going to want to have everything done up to the day of the election finished, then I would say bring them in at the beginning. Bring them in maybe at the end of that first week. So ballots are going to go out on Tuesday, maybe wait until Friday as your first day, maybe wait until the following Monday, maybe not bring them in during the middle of the week, bring them in Thursday, Friday, don't make them work on weekends, and then Monday and election day, something like that. But it's really up to you, and if you've never done a mail ballot election before, you're really not going to know. And you're just going to have to do the best you can. The judges are pretty good about being flexible. That has been my experience.
Awesome.
I'm sorry for the non-answer, but that's the best I can give you.
No, I think that well described it. We've got one more that asks, who do we contact at the Secretary of State for DEO access? Okay.
You will go to the Secretary of State website. All right. So here's what you do. So you just go to the Secretary of State website. Go to there's a menu at the upper left-hand corner, and you want to go to elections and voting. And there should be a drop-down menu. And what you're looking for is where it says administrator login. And then there are 3 links. One will be municipal. And you will then click on that and fill out the form. And then just, you can, copy it as a PDF and then email it. I have mine saved and I changed election dates. And if that doesn't work for you, contact me directly and I can get it on my computer and I can walk you through it. So your DEO access, they will give you a username. You will create your own password. Your election judges can all use the same password. If you need simultaneous, signature verification, if you've got more than one computer set up to do signature verification, and your password's good for 90 days.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think with that, we're ready to move on.
All right. Okay, so when you've done your canvass, when the results are official, then you're going to prepare that's what's called a certificate of election. I get from the abstract of votes. So it's going to include the following information: the name of the candidates and the listing of all the ballot items, the total votes cast, and you can put absentee ballots in. If you're doing a polling place election, you can put them in a separate column, or you can just add them to the total. If you look at the statutes currently on absentee ballots, it pretty much says you have to have a separate poll book, you have to separate count, all this kind. And now, I think in the old days that was important, but I would say you don't have to do that. And then you have to sign it, and also the person who assisted you in the canvass has to sign the document as well. And then here's where it goes. You keep one in your office. Unfortunately, as there too many election records are misplaced or don't even exist. And it's really hard to know when somebody's term is up, whether they were appointed to fill a shortened term and they have to run again without good records. So you keep a record of the results. You publish your results in your newspaper, or if you don't have a newspaper, you post it wherever you do all your legal postings. You file it with the Department of Local Affairs, with DOLA, not with the Secretary of State's office, with DOLA. And I will be sending out a memo from Joe McConnell at DOLA explaining how you file it. And then I've also added filing your election results with the Municipal League. Melissa Mata does a great survey every year. They keep track of every election, whether it's a special election, an April election, a November election, a recall election, whatever. They keep a good record. So you'll need to file it with CML. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to make sure that when you file it with CML, you file all the information. And I don't know if anybody who canceled their election is listening to this webinar, but I will be putting this out on the listserv. It's not enough to say, we had 4 positions open, we only had 2 candidates, so we canceled our election. That's fine, but you need to say who was declared elected, because that's what you do when you cancel the election. You declare whoever was on the ballot elected. So it's not enough to say we just canceled the election. We need to know who got elected, and you need to keep that information so that, again, if the person, regarding term limits and that kind of thing. So any questions about this certificate of election? I know it's a lot of forms, but, keeping good records regarding, everybody keeps their ordinances and their resolutions and their minutes. And a lot of election records have a very short-term retention. But these are historical records, and as such, they need to be permanent records. It is so disappointing when I talk to a relatively new clerk who can't find anything about what happened in past elections because nobody thought to keep good records. Now, I know none of you would do that kind of thing, but that's what's happened in the past. And you have to think about it in terms of helping out your successor once you win the lottery and move to Tahiti. So make sure you keep good records of the election results. Questions?
Yes, we did have one come through.
All right.
When do we post the notice of election prior to election day?
According to state statute, the notice of the election, which includes a copy of what's on the ballot, in addition to where it's being held, when it's being held, how it's being held, how people can apply for absentee ballots if that's relevant, that kind of thing, is published no later than 10 days before the day of the election. If you have a daily newspaper, if you have a weekly newspaper, then it's the week prior to that. So it would be 2 weeks before the date of the election. So that would be coming up here pretty soon.
Perfect, thank you. Looks like that was all the questions.
All right, well, I think after this, we're gonna move briefly on to recount, sorry, not recall. Oh, no, sorry, one more. All right. At the time of the canvass, here, this is very confusing. I'm thinking of doing a class only on this. But if the election included 4-year overlapping terms, and one of the candidates was being chosen to fill a vacancy that would not normally be up, then who gets the full terms and who gets the shortened terms is determined by the number of votes each person has received. So in other words, if somebody got appointed to serve after the last election and before this election, but the term that they're serving would not come up until 2024, that position still has to be on the ballot along with the full term positions, and whoever gets elected is according to the number of votes they received. We can come back to this if you want to think about it and ask questions.
Awesome. Doesn't look like we had any questions for that.
Okay, so let's move on. Okay, recount. Again, you don't decide whether you're going to have a recount until your votes are official. And there are 2 types of recount. That's what I call the automatic recount or a requested recount. So an automatic or a required recount occurs when the difference between the highest and the next highest number of votes is very small. It's equal to less than or equal to 0.5% of the highest number of votes cast. So for example, if in a mayor's race, you have, you're only electing one mayor, but if in a mayor's race, the vote is really close, you take the number of votes that the highest person got, and you multiply that by 0.05, and you get a number. And then you subtract the lowest, the second highest number from the first, and if that number is that number or less, then you do an automatic recount. So a 1 vote difference may not constitute a recount depending upon the number of votes that somebody received. And the recount can not only be held for, like in the mayor's position, the top vote getter, but let's say you're electing 3 trustees and you have 4 candidates, and so the first 2 candidates, it's real clear that they won, they got the highest number, but there's a close race between the 3rd and the 4th candidate, that could also be subject to recount. So it's not just the top, you have to look at all the positions. Now, obviously, if you have 3 positions on the ballot, or to be voted on, you have 4 candidates, and the vote between the 2nd and the 3rd is really close, well, that's not going to issue a recount because you can elect 3 people. But if you have 4 candidates and it's close between the 3rd and the 4th, that could trigger a recount. And this recount has to be completed no later than the 15th day following the election, Remember, after you do the canvass, which is no later than the 10 days, so in essence, you have 5 days to conduct the recount. And when you do a recount, you actually count all the ballots over again if you need to do it. And it should be a public, so you need to identify a time when you're going to do the recount, and you're going to let the candidates who are affected by it observe the process in a way that's similar to if they were watchers. And if you had something on the ballot and the yes and no votes were really close for a recount, then the people who petitioned to put something on the ballot, they should be also allowed to observe the process of counting the ballots once again. Any questions about this? The number is really, really low, and it's usually, you know, and we don't see a lot of recounts. And it's low for a reason, so that we don't have to see a lot of recounts.
Doesn't look like we have any questions. I think we can move on.
All right. Okay. And again, a requested recount, any candidate or interested party or party of interest may request that a recount be conducted. And if a recount is being requested, then the person requesting it has to pay for it. And what do they pay for? Basically, the judge's time is what they would pay for. And then they have to file that request within 10 days after the election, which is when the canvass would be done. And again, it has to be completed with no later than 15 days after the election.
Perfect.
All right.
No questions yet.
All right. Okay. Okay. So I put this in this time because I'm figuring that we have one more webinar post-election, and it's kind of like a you know, a recap or a post-mortem, and I know a lot of people don't show up, but I wanted to let you know that these are the kinds of election issues that I keep hearing about year after year after year. And one is, you know, what do you include or exclude in terms of signatures on nomination petitions? That people have election provisions in their codes that are at odds with the state statute. The one that is the most often has to do with the deadline for filing an affidavit of intent to be a write-in candidate. And I think what happens here is that something's put in the code. There hasn't been an election for several election cycles. The clerk doesn't pay attention to any election changes because the chances of canceling is pretty high, and then all of a sudden they have an election and their code is outdated. We talked about, again, premature concerns about canceling the election, about the need for a recount, about tie votes, how people handle write-in candidates. Again, the deadline is part of that. The issue around, can you cancel an election when you have both full and shortened terms on the same ballot? The law says no. Practically, there may be a way that you can do that, so you don't have to run an election where, you know, you've got one candidate for mayor and you've got 3 candidates for 3 positions on the ballot, but one of them is for a shortened term, you know, that kind of thing. Then there's always the issue between the term of office and the person who's in office. If somebody's appointed to fill a shortened term, the position goes on the ballot, but the person doesn't necessarily run for that specific position. This is something I just mentioned, poor record keeping. That's a big, and then unfamiliarity with the election code provisions. I love it when I hear from a clerk who says, I read the statute and this is what I think. Am I interpreting it directly or correctly? I'm always happy to say yes or no to help them out. What I think makes me crazy, I don't think it makes me crazy. It does make me crazy, is when somebody doesn't want to read the statutes or do the work involved and wants to rely on other people for getting the information. Clerks are great about helping out, but I think that if you do the work, you're better off, you're more likely to retain and understand what you're doing than if somebody hands them something to you. And I don't mean to insult anybody, because I know everybody's busy, and the last 2 years have been crazed with closed buildings and remote meetings and all that kind of thing. But there is nothing at all like learning what it is you need to learn, because we're responsible for it. So before we go on to talk about, the wrap up and things like that, any questions about this or anything else while you have me, and the other people who are here can benefit from your questions? So any other questions you'd like to ask about the election at all?
Yes, we do
Okay,
have a couple.
all right.
So this question asks, our election was canceled. Can you explain again if DOLA receives the results of the candidates declared?
If they do, or is the question, does DOLA receive it? The answer is yes, and watch for my memo, because basically I'm forwarding on a memo from Joe McConnell, who explains how you notify them, and you do it electronically, and what information they require, or what they're looking for. So I hope that's responsive to your question.
Perfect, thank you. The next one asks, the printer had to print prior to January 31st, so we put write-in information just in case, but no one did write in. Is there any issue with that?
If you have an ordinance that requires somebody to file a notice of intent to be a write-in candidate in order to be a write-in candidate, then my suggestion would be anybody who writes a name in, you just ignore it. Because they're unless they filed that notice, that like I couldn't write my name in on election day because I did not file a valid notice of intent. However, if you don't have an ordinance that requires that, you have to accept every write-in candidate, every write-in that shows up on your ballot.
Thank you. The next one asks, what do people typically pay election judges?
I don't know, and maybe people can answer. What I like to suggest is that you contact your county clerk and find out what the hourly rate is that they pay, because they usually pay an hourly rate, and it's somewhere around, I don't know, $15, $16 an hour. If you're a polling place election, you have a supply judge. The supply judge usually gets about $1 more. I would also suggest that you go to the listserv when this is all over and ask the question and see what people have to say.
Perfect. So the next one says, weirdly enough, I have people turning their Tabor notice as their ballot in. Do you feel there's any need to retain these for the record? Clearly it is not a ballot and won't be counted. Curious more than anything. Never had this happen before.
Yeah, I've seen that happen. I've seen people vote their instructions and vote their Tabor notice. Just set them aside, but just at some point you'll dispose of it. Just ignore it. Just ignore it. And what they'll do, the Tabor notice goes out before the ballot. I think they'll figure it out once they get their ballot.
Great. Another one asks, if I am sending a letter to an individual who announced their candidacy but has not turned in their candidate affidavit, by law, they will be disqualified after 5 business days. Does this mean they are disqualified from the election?
This came up on the listserv yesterday, and I cited the statute that talks about this, but this is definitely a question for your town attorney.
Awesome.
It's a legal matter.
Perfect. We don't have any questions quite yet. I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up, and then if we have any come through in those last couple of minutes, we can go ahead and ask those. Does that sound all right?
That's perfect. That's perfect.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to the next slide really quickly. All right. So everyone who is looking to get credit, this is how you can do so. Half credit for each webinar is available, and this is no different. That form is available at cml.org. You're just going to go to the top menu and you'll click on Education and Training, then go down to Clerks, and you'll find it on that page. I'll also send out the information in my follow-up email along with a recording of this webinar and the slides and all other information that you might need. Those completed forms can be sent to Kathy Novak. And then you can go ahead and register for future webinars. And I apologize, I did not remove this webinar from my slide. So the next one will be April, and I believe, Karen, that's April 14th. So I will go ahead and send that corrected date and a link to register for that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I was just double checking that because I know I had something else scheduled for the 21st. So thank you.
Yep, no problem. So that'll all be available in follow-up, I promise. And then finally, my last slide is just another reminder that the 2021 election book is available. One free copy was mailed to all members, but other copies are always available. There are also PDF versions available for free to members, and you can find those at the CML store. Karen, thank you very much for all the work that you put into that. We're really excited about it, and it has a ton of great information in it. So this is an awesome resource if anyone ever does have extra questions or just kind of wants to, look at various election materials. So with that, it looks like those are all of our questions for now. Karen, do you have any closing thoughts before we go ahead and close out?
I want to thank everybody for attending these, webinars. This is, I think, the third election cycle that we've done this. I need to thank CML for their willingness to host these. I think these are really valuable, and I wish you all the best. And if you got anything that comes up between now and then, or during, or whatever, just feel free to contact me. And I know that all your elections are going to work out just fine. So thank you very much, and stay warm. And spring's got to come at some point, right?
We'll just keep waiting for it.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.